sure, we have been emphasizing mental health. So today we are going to hear from our expert witness, finally. I was finally, thank you, Chris, able to find someone who I am confident you will appreciate. Dr. Matt Tolbert is a professor at Southern Adventist University. He is a true Southern boy, like Tim and Scylla and Beth, only even more so. He was born at Southern while his parents were studying there. Then he came back and got his undergraduate and his graduate degree, and he went all the way to UTC for his PhD. Before he came back to Southern, he worked with children and young adults, and he also worked in a psychiatric hospital as a counselor and behavioral therapist. And now that he's at Southern, he's got lots going on. And see if I can get it up here. Not only is he a professor of psychology, he is the director of the Center for Learning, Innovation, and Research. Their most current studies involve gamified self-care. That's interesting. So using points and competition to help people take care of themselves. His major counseling had to do with anxiety, mostly had to do with anxiety, depression, and bipolar. And those are huge. I know they're huge, big among us as well. And so let's welcome Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Great. How do I? Oh, there we go. Let me make sure everything is working. Oh, so wonderful to be here. Just want to let you know that usually when I have a lot of space in the middle, I make my students kind of come up to the front. I won't do that to you today. But oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So just know I'm giving you grace and mercy today for that. I'm very happy that Don has helped me in preparing for coming today, and that Chris thought of me. I appreciate that. I've known Chris for over 25 years, since college, and he and I used to play football together, tackle football when we were younger. Then we shifted to flag football. Now we're at pickleball, so. we are, well, the years have been kind to us, so let's just say that. I'm excited to be here to talk about the mind with you today. It's my favorite topic, actually. I believe the mind to be God's greatest creation. He formed us from the earth and put intentional design to design us in God's own image. And so for that reason, I think that the mind is the greatest creation. And so I think the study of the mind is also one of the highest callings that we can have. Paul actually says in Romans 1:20 that since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, can be seen and understood through the things God has made. So the more we study God's creation, the better we understand God, the better we understand ourselves and the intention God had in designing us. And that's really what we're going to talk about a lot today. Let me have a word of prayer and ask God to be with us, and then we'll get into this. God in heaven, you have promised to have your Spirit guide us into all truth. I pray that you guide us today. You know I pray, Lord, amen. So the passage that I'd like to focus on today is one you're probably familiar with, but if not, we're going to go ahead and go through it here briefly. But that is found in Luke 25 through 28. I'm going to focus on Luke chapter 10, verse 27. You can actually find versions of this passage in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew 22, in Mark 12, and here in Luke 10. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to let you know, Don said I had like an hour. Is that okay? I heard that the pastor here likes to speak for that long. I'm used to that. That's the way I go with my classes, so I'll try to keep you focused here. So Luke 10:27. In this case, what's in the other passages, in Matthew and Mark, those gospels actually have Jesus saying these words here. But in Luke, it's a little bit different. An expert in the law comes to Jesus and says, "What do I need to do?" Or what is the greatest commandment, I should say? And Jesus says, well, what does the Scriptures say? And then the expert in the law says this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus commends him and says, yes, you're right. Now, this is actually a quote from an Old Testament passage, which is Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. So you can turn there if you like. I will put it up here on the screen. Deuteronomy 6, verse 5 says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Now, it's really interesting. Right here, you'll see that there are two things missing from this passage that we saw in the Gospels. Two things. Might, in this case, refers generally to strength. But the two things that are missing are additions that Jesus makes in Matthew and Mark and commends the expert in making in Luke. And those two additions are the mind and your neighbor as yourself. So just to reiterate, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. That matches what Deuteronomy says. But then the gospel writers add, and with all your mind and your neighbor as yourself. This is pretty significant. Now, it makes sense that the mind would come on because, of course, the culture of that day in the first century was heavily influenced by Greek thought. The New Testament was written in Greek. We actually have passages written in Greek. So we understand that Greek thought was there. And of course, you have the Greek philosophers, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and they had already very much talked about the mind. And so it makes sense that we would do this, except that they didn't think of the mind in response to how we might love God. Instead, they were thinking of how we might reason through this life. But what Jesus does here is say, no, the mind is important for loving God. And so that's one thing that I'd like to talk about today very specifically. We'll talk about your neighbor as yourself a little later, but I'd like to first start with the mind. Okay. We are going to focus on three different areas. Can you read that okay? That's a little small. I'll read it for you just to make sure. We're going to focus on design, disruption, and new direction. So design, of course, refers to the mind being designed by God, and we'll talk about that design. Second, we're going to talk about how our minds have been disrupted. Of course, due to the state of the world we live in, right? The sinfulness that this world exists within has certainly had an effect on us and continues to have an effect on us and will probably until Jesus comes again. So we have a disruption that we're dealing with here. And then finally, we have a new direction. This is how does God provide new direction to help to restore our minds to God's original design? So those are the three things that we're going to focus on here. Now, I like to start with the design, and I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was a kid, we lived in Florida, Fort Myers, Florida. My dad was a pastor, and he pastored down there, and so when I was a kid. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Florida, but they have really big bugs down there. Are you familiar with the bugs that Florida has? They have giant beetles. Cockroaches are like 2 inches long. I remember when I was a kid being outside the church and there was like the street lamp at night and these bugs would just gather around the street lamp and they're giant bugs. But that includes spiders. Oh, somebody knows what I'm talking about. Spiders. And with hair on them. Every kind of spider. And they're big. They're awful. They're awful. Well, when I was a kid, my brother and I, we lived in the same bedroom. And we had bunk beds. And I was on the top bunk, because apparently my parents didn't mind if I fell and hurt myself. Anyway, the point is I was on the top bunk. And it was so high up that while laying down, I could reach out and I could touch the ceiling. That's how high the bunk bed was. And I remember one night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I could see the full moon through the window, which is usually the way it is in these kinds of stories. And the full moon the light was coming in, and it was playing across my sheets and my blanket. And there, above my face on the ceiling, was a spider. It was a huge wolf spider. Now, I want to warn you, I have a picture of the spider that I want you to see. And I know some people could be nervous around pictures like this. I know I am. But I wanted to at least warn you before showing you the way this spider looks. That's the spider. Wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. That wasn't exactly. But it did have a lot more hair than this guy did. It was more like that. I did not accept any hugs from this guy. He's cute. Spiders, if there's one word you cannot use about spiders, it's the word cute. They are not cute. So I had this spider right above my face. I could reach out and touch it. I didn't touch it, but I could if I wanted to. It was right there, and I was frozen in fear. I guess I fell asleep at some point, and then I woke up the next day, and I was scared of spiders. To this day, I'm scared of spiders. I have arachnophobia. Anybody here relate? Oh, a few. Oh, all right. Now, a phobias, maybe a little bit. Anybody scared of snakes? Oh, yeah, okay. So, well, you got both. Maria's got both over there. Okay. So snakes and spiders, those are the two big ones, but there could be other things. Now, a phobia is an irrational fear. What that means is you're scared of the thing that you're scared of, even if there's no danger of the thing. A friend of mine is scared of sharks. And she, of course, if she's in the water and she's scared of sharks, well, then that makes a lot of sense. But if she's not in the water, if she's standing in her living room and somebody yells shark and she gets scared, well, that's kind of irrational, right? This is considered an anxiety disorder. Now, anxiety is this feeling of something bad is going to happen. It's important to note, something bad has not yet happened. It's something bad is going to happen. So it's a worry of something happening in the future. Okay? Say that again. And all the ways, the 1,000 ways it might happen. So you can have worry about a lot of different things. You could be worried that your sports team is going to lose. That's anxiety. You could be worried that it might rain when you go for your hike. That's anxiety. Or you might be scared that you might get bitten by a spider and die. That's also anxiety. So unless there's a spider actually biting you, or potentially could bite you, then it's anxiety. If it was actually doing that, then that's real fear. So we understand the difference here. Now, this is really important. This is really important to understand how the phobia developed, and it relates to how the mind is designed, specifically the issue of memory. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the brain and how the mind and the brain are connected. The brain is made up of 86 billion neurons. That's billion with a B. Billion neurons. Now, a neuron is just a cell that transmits information through the body. You saw on the screen when the children's story was going on, the cochlear nerve, the vestibular cochlear nerve. That cochlear nerve goes into the brain. It transmits the sound waves that are detected by the eardrum and all the other parts, and those sound waves hit the nerve. And then the nerve changes that into an electrical impulse that goes into the brain, as she mentioned, that helps you to understand what the sound is, like the sound of my voice or the sound of music or whatever. It goes into the temporal lobe, into the auditory cortex of the brain, and that is where it's processed so that we understand. I know that some of this is technical language. I don't think it's too difficult, but if anyone has any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. It turns it into electrical impulse, and it communicates. Now, the thing is it doesn't communicate perfectly all the way through. This is my very horrible drawing of neurons, okay? I am a terrible artist, which is why I always try to draw, so that people know just how bad I am. And these are neurons, okay? And so what happens here, I'm going to go ahead and change the color a little bit. What happens here is that this sending neuron has an electrical impulse. The sound hits the ear, and this senses what's going on, and then it changes to an electrical impulse that travels down the neuron to the end, okay? And then what it needs to do is it's responsible for only sensing the sound. It can't do anything else. That's all it does is sense the sound. So it has to communicate to other neurons in the brain so that neurons can know what it is the sound is and try to understand it. And how does it do this? Well, here is a little gap. This is a little gap right here. And this gap is where they pass hormones. Hormones, neurotransmitters that transmit information from neurons. And these hormones, like adrenaline, which is exactly what I was experiencing when I saw that spider, or dopamine, which has the experience of pleasure and joy when you're singing a beautiful song that you just love. Whatever the case may be, these are some of the hormones that are passed between neurons. And so what happens is that this neuron here, the receiving neuron, gathers up all the hormones until it understands what the sending neuron was trying to tell it. And then that goes on into the brain and then communicates with other neurons. Now, all of this happens in a split nanosecond, okay? It happens so quickly that we're not even aware that it is happening, of course. But when we talk about the experience of fear or the experience of, well, any experience really, most of the issue that we have is dealing with that process right there. How well does this happen? That's what we're trying to understand. So when we have an experience, like spiders or whatever, what happens is that a certain group of neurons fire all at the same time. They fire all at the same time, and then they remember that they fire all at the same time. Now, it's not all the neurons, but if you're having an experience, when I was looking at that spider, all my neurons, there were groups of neurons that were all firing, and they had the thoughts going through my head and the emotions that I was feeling and the sensing, the vision that I had right there, the light coming in, all of that, all the neurons fired in that moment. Then later, when I have a memory of that spider, the same neurons fire. And that's how we remember. But the thing is that because we remember in this way, because all the neurons are firing, it's not just I remember seeing it, but I also remember how I felt. And I also remember the thoughts that were going into my head. Oh no, this spider's going to kill me. And in that moment, when I'm remembering, I'm also feeling it just like I was there. I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. When you have these memories, this is what's going on. Memories are neurons firing at the same way in the same time that they did before, and that's why you have the experience. And all of the experience comes together. The important thing to note that this is not, there's the memory, yeah. This is not magic. This is God's design. God designed the brain this way, and the mind is the experience and function of the brain. And so he designed memory to work in this fashion to help us understand who we are. not just who we are in our own heads, but who we are with the people that we love. He designed us to experience joy and remember that joy. He designed, of course, for survival, the fear that we might have when something dangerous is nearby. And he designed it so that the experiences that we can have with God can be remembered too, including the emotions and the thoughts that we had when we had these experiences with God. So this is by God's design. This is how this works. The problem is, sometimes these memories create such a moment, they're not so good. We have bad memories. Memories that we don't want to remember, and yet we don't really have control over these things. And sometimes the fear or the anxiety that we experience, it actually inhibits our ability to live the life of love that God calls us to, because we are so overwhelmed by the memory. So this is the disruption. The disruption, of course, happened well before we were born. This is something that happened in the Garden of Eden first, but it's something that continues to happen for us throughout our lives. We tend to encounter problems and issues in our lives that then we need to find a way to overcome. One of these disruptions is when I was early on in my career, I was working as Don mentioned in counseling, and I worked as a behavioral specialist in some school systems. And my job was to work with children who had, disruptions or issues or problems that they may have encountered. And one of the things that I often encountered was ADHD. Have you heard of ADHD? The letters are Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And I remember one kid in particular, his name was little Johnny. He was 9 years old, and he was a challenge. Teacher just had the hardest time with him. He was getting up and running around the room all the time. He'd get into altercations with his classmates. He would disobey. He would speak out of turn. He was so disruptive, actually, that he had to be put on 2-hour days. Like a school day is like 6.5 hours, and he could not maintain for that long. Now, of course, this was a burden to the parents because they had to find childcare outside of school, and this was a very difficult thing for them. And so the teacher said, well, we want to give him medication. And the parents were like, no, we do not want medication. So we were at an impasse. What do we do? What do we do? Well, ADHD, just a kind of example of what ADHD is, it's typically diagnosed in boys more than girls, about 9 times in boys more than girls. That doesn't mean girls don't experience ADHD at some point. They do, but it just looks different. And boys tend to be hyperactive. I don't know if you know boys very well. Boys tend to be hyperactive. And so they're very, very much moving around and trying to understand, they're trying to do the things, all the things. And so often medication is prescribed, and that medication that's prescribed is what we call a stimulant. Stimulates the brain, speeds it up. But it seems kind of strange that we would give a stimulant to somebody who's already hyperactive, right? I remember when my son used to drink caffeine as a young, he got a hold of some caffeine, and he just ran around for an hour and a half like there was no tomorrow. It's true. The thing is that with ADHD, the brain isn't moving too fast. It's actually moving too slowly. What's really going on here is it's a neurodevelopmental disorder where the brain is not moving fast enough to control behavior. That's what's going on. So let's take little Johnny, and let's say he's in line, and he's standing right behind a little girl with pigtails. Anybody know what's going to happen here? So the pigtails are like, you really want to pull those pigtails. Like, That's what you want to do. But now little Johnny, if he was normal, his brain would say, oh, better not do that. Going to get in trouble. So if it was an average brain, then he would know that he's not supposed to do that. Of course he knows he's not supposed to do that. But in his case, the brain is moving too slowly. So when he gets the urge to pull the pigtail, the brain is not moving fast enough to stop him. And so he reaches out, he's like, you better not do that. And he's already done it. And then the brain finishes, you're going to get in trouble. Oh, well, great, I already did it. So little girl tells the teacher, and the teacher comes over and says to little Johnny, why did you do that? And his answer is, I don't know, because my brain finished. My brain told me I'm not supposed to do that, but I couldn't control it. So often we're given a stimulant which speeds the brain up and makes it possible for him to control his behavior. But the problem is that only masks the issue. It only addresses the symptom. It doesn't actually help the brain improve. Because part of God's design, a very important part of God's design, is something we call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity. Essentially, it's the ability for our neurons to change when they are asked to change. So have you ever tried to, pretty much do anything, ride a bike? What happens the first time you ride your bike? You fall. Unless you're like really athletic. You fall, most likely. And why is it that you fall? You can't balance. That's very, very true. You can't balance. You can't coordinate very well, your feet on the pedals, and you might fall over, and you get scared because it's going so fast, and all these other kinds of things. And so this is why you have a father, usually a father, but sometimes a mother, who will be there holding the seat to make sure that you're not going to fall until such a time that you are able to do it. Now, through practice and continuing to try, you're eventually able to ride a bike. Now, here's the thing. The only way you can ride a bike is if your neurons in your brain and the rest of your body are trained to ride that bike. So when you practice something, whether it be riding a bike or playing piano, as we heard so beautifully, or whatever the case may be, what's going on is that your neurons in your brain are changing. They're adapting to what they're being asked to do. And this is called neuroplasticity. What this is really important is this is also part of God's design. Neuroplasticity makes it possible for us to improve the way our neurons work so that we can overcome whatever disruption we are dealing with. So, when it comes to little Johnny, we actually found a mechanism. There was some research that was done at a university up in Tennessee, and they created a contraption, a machine, that allowed us to produce what is called neurobiofeedback. Basically, it's a helmet that little Johnny wore that would read his brain waves, and we can kind of see the electrical parts of his brain. We can kind of see what's going on. And that is attached to a video game. And then we put the helmet on little Johnny and asked him to play the video game. And then what he would do is if he lost focus, got distracted, was not able to really concentrate on the video game, the helmet would read that, stop the game, and then using visual prompts and audio prompts, hey, please focus, get him back on track. What it was doing, it was asking Johnny to use his brain to do something he was not really capable of doing. And every time he lost focus, he'd be asked to refocus, which he then would do, use his brain to refocus. He did 3 sessions a week, 30 minutes per session for 6 months. And you can probably guess what happened. After 6 months, he was on full school days. No problems with his classmates. He was getting straight A's. He was the teacher's pet. He was like helping pan things out, and the teacher's like, it's like a whole new kid. Utilizing God's design for how we can address this disruption that we experience. So God's design, neurons and hormones, as we discussed, memories and how memories can affect us, but then how we can use neuroplasticity to repair where we are going and what's going on with us. Now, one of the things that I believe is so very important, the treatment that Johnny experienced is an example of what we call what I'm calling a new direction. It provides him the resources to overcome ADHD in the moment and live a new life. It's not magic. It's God's design. And by committing, he can be transformed. But how is this transformation accomplished? So let's go back. I don't have it up here. Well, I will go ahead and just quote it for you. Let's go back and remind us. Luke 10:27. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, which is one edition. And then the second edition is... Now the next, here it is. I just put it in the wrong spot. There it is. So the next really interesting part of this passage is we move to Luke 10, verse 29. Go to verse 29. And the expert in the law asks a very important question. What does he ask there? Anyone? And who is my neighbor? So, Jesus says, the greatest commandment is this. And then when asked who the neighbor is, what does Jesus say? He goes into a parable. And that parable? The Good Samaritan. Now, you are probably familiar with the Good Samaritan, but I'm going to go ahead and hit the highlights for you. He tells the story of a man who was walking on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers who stole things and beat him up and left him for dead on the side of the road. And there he is. And then, Jesus said, 3 men come walking by. First a priest, then a Levite, and then a Samaritan. The first 2 are the Jewish elite, righteous in the culture. And what do? They ignore him, and Jesus says they walk on the other side of the road. They don't even be near the guy. But then the Samaritan comes, and what does Jesus say about the Samaritan? Jesus says he was moved to compassion. And so the Samaritan then bandages up his wounds, takes him, puts him on his horse or his donkey or whatever it was, takes him to an inn to take care of him. Then he tells the innkeeper, I am going to pay for him now and until I return. I'm paying for everything. Take care of this guy. He comes back and he takes care of this guy. And then Jesus has a really important interaction with the expert in the law. In verses 36 and 37, Jesus asks the expert in the law, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the expert says, the one who showed him mercy. Now the Samaritan, and you are probably familiar with this, ostracized from Jewish culture. They were hated by the Jews. So to have the one who showed him mercy to be the one who treated the man like a neighbor, and the Jewish elite considered to be righteous did not, is a huge little switch that Jesus kind of pulls on them there. And so Jesus says, go and do likewise. It's really important for us to understand that where does the new direction come from to overcome the disruption? Other people. God uses people to help people. You can see this throughout the scriptures. God sends Moses to free the Israelites from Egypt, right? God sends Esther to save her people. God sends Jonah to Nineveh to save the Ninevites. He didn't want to, but he did. God sends Paul to the Gentiles to save the Gentiles. But now God doesn't all just talk about, please save these people. Sometimes God is there to sending people to make other people aware of their disruption. He sends prophets to kings. He sent Samuel to Saul to say, buddy, you have a disruption here. You got something wrong going on. He sends Nathan to see King David, who had made some mistakes with Bathsheba. Hey, you need to pay attention to what's going on here. All throughout the scriptures, God is sending people with messages or with talents or with skills in order to help other people. That is the way, very specifically, that God works. Very specifically to the way God works. God uses people to help people. So here's a question. Who has come into your life to help you? I'm not asking you to answer that question in the moment. I want you to ruminate on that. Think about that a moment. Who are the people that God has sent to you to help you? I can think of many for me. I can think of teachers when I was in high school, a chaplain when I was in college, a therapist that I have had that helps me to understand myself and my own disruption a little bit better. There are plenty of people who have come into my life to help me. Because sometimes I've been asked to be the Samaritan, to help others. But sometimes I've been the man on the side of the road who's been beaten half to death by life. My mind is not there, and I need help. So when have you been the Samaritan, and when have you needed a Samaritan? We often hear this, and we think, yeah, we need to go out and help people. But how often are we willing to let others help us? One last story, and I'll let you go. I think I might even be before an hour's up. There was a psychologist who had a woman come into his office. She was very well dressed, and she came in, sat down. He says, okay, what's going on? How can I help you? And she said, well, doctor, I think I'm going to kill myself. He said, whoa, what's going on? She said, well, I have no one in my life who loves me, and I have no one in my life to love. So I think there's no point in living. I'm going to kill myself. He said, tell me a little bit about yourself. She said, well, I'm very successful in business. I'm a VP of my company, and I make a lot of money. But I spend so much time working that I just don't have any friends. And then I was an only child, and my parents have passed on, so I don't have any family. And I'm ugly. She said, I have a gap in my teeth, right there. You know that? It was pretty big. It was like, I don't know if you watch football, it was Michael Strahan big. It was like really big, like big gap there. And she said, I'm so ugly, no one is going to love me, so I'm going to kill myself. Now, he suspected maybe she was certainly feeling some depression, but he was like, I don't know if she's really serious, because she's coming here, she's well-dressed, she presents well, so maybe this. So he said, okay, well, then I'd like you to do something. And he said, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to the spa and get a massage and buy yourself a new wardrobe. Go pamper yourself for a while. She said, well, that's not very fiscally responsible. He's like, well, what have you got to lose? You're going to kill yourself anyway. You might as well. So she thought, okay, yeah, all right. So she goes off, and she does. She goes to the spa, and she buys a new wardrobe. She comes back the next week, and she feels better. I look better. I feel better. Sure. But still, that was just it's a momentary experience. It's not something that's going to last. He's like, okay, well, here's another thing. Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to go on vacation. Like go on a cruise or something. Go see the world a little bit. And she said, oh, that's expensive. I don't know that I should do that. He's like, well, what have you got to lose? You're going to kill yourself anyway. You might as well. So she says, you're right. Fine. Okay. So she does. She goes on a cruise. She goes for 2 weeks. Lots of sun. Maybe she meets some people, don't know, but nobody that she has a long-lasting friendship with. And she comes back after a couple of weeks and she sits down in his seat and she said, yes, that certainly made me feel better. But doctor, I don't have anyone in my life who loves me and who I can love. So I'm going to kill myself. So he said, tell me about your job. What is your experience at the job? She said, well, I pretty much work in a cubicle or in my office all day long, and then the only interaction I get is when I go up to the water cooler, and I get a drink at the water cooler, and sometimes my colleagues will come up there and we'll have these conversations. It's really just small talk, nothing big. He's like, anybody in particular? And she said, well, there is this guy who comes up sometimes, and we have a good conversation every once and again, but that's it. We don't talk to each other outside of work, so there's nothing there. I have no one in my life. He's like, okay, here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to learn to squirt water between that gap in your teeth. She said, what? I want you to learn to squirt water between that gap in your teeth. She said, I'm not doing that. He said, what have you got to lose? You're going to kill yourself anyway. You might as well. So she says, fine. Okay, fine. So she goes off. She learns to squirt water. She comes back into the doctor, and she demonstrates it for him. She's pretty accurate, up to about 6 feet. He said, okay, tomorrow, here's what I'd like you to do. Go to work. Go up to the water cooler. If that man comes up to the water cooler, I want you to take some water in your mouth, face him, and squirt him in the face. She said, absolutely not. I am not doing that. He's like, what have you got to lose? You're going to kill yourself anyway. You might as well. She still says, no, I'm not doing it. So next week when her appointment comes around, she doesn't show. The next week, doesn't show again. The next week, doesn't show. The doctor is out of his mind. Oh no, like she killed herself and I told her to. I just like, oh no. About 2.5, 3 months goes by, and he gets a call, and it's her. And she says, can I come in? He's like, absolutely, come in. So she comes in for the appointment and sits down. He said, please, I'm so happy you're alive. Tell me what happened. She said, well, I went into work the day after our appointment, and I was not going to do what you told me to do. I went up to the water cooler to get some water, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walking up. And I just put my head down and I said, no, no, no. But then I remembered what you said. What have I got to lose? So I took some water in my mouth. I turned to him and I squirted him right in the face. Then I turned and I ran into the bathroom. I was mortified. No, I took the rest of the day off and I went home. I was not going to face him again. Next day, I decided to go into work, but I said I was not going up to the water cooler at all. I was just going to stay in my office. But I got thirsty. So I went up there, but I just was going to keep my head down, not look at anyone. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see him walking up. And I am so embarrassed. But then I see he's got something in his hand. And I looked, and it was a water pistol. And he squirted me in the face with it. And we got into this huge water fight where he's squirting me and I'm squirting him. And by the end of it, he asked me out for the next day. And we've seen each other every day since. And doctor, I wanted to come in and tell you, he asked me to marry him. And I wanted to invite you to the wedding. And the doctor said, of course, I'm so very happy for you. But I have one question. Are you going to fix the teeth before the wedding? She said, doctor, why would I get rid of the one thing that brought me and my husband together? He didn't have to change her. All he had to do was come into her life and show her a new direction. And using what we call priming and memory an acknowledgement of the disruption, but showing that new direction, he was able to change her, well, she was able to change her life. These kinds of divine appointments are not rare. There are people who are there to help us, who are trained to help us through whatever we might experience, whether it be fear or anxiety or depression, whatever these experiences are, we must acknowledge that God has designed our minds to respond to this help in ways that will help us better to know how to love God and love others. God's design and the 86 billion neurons that we have that allow our brains to make the mind possible. We don't live in a perfect world that was originally created, and we need help. I'll tell you, sometimes I feel like that man who was beaten by robbers. Sometimes I have, and I don't have the ability to heal myself, and I need help. So I turn to the people in my life who have done that for me, or I seek people out who can do that for me. And then God sends someone in my life to help me overcome this disruption and find that new direction. And I think we can all think of times when that has happened to us. If it hasn't happened for you, it can happen for you. There are resources and people available who can help, because God uses people to help people. Counselors and teachers and physicians and people who study science and medicine and pastors. And there are so many people who are there who can provide a healing hand of God to us in times of disruption and times of need. And once we are transformed from this healing, we can truly live out God's greatest commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Amen.